Welcome back to Workshop Friend, and in this video I'm going to be covering the shipment of my Colchester Student lathe from Pakistan to the UK. So we're going to have to go back 4 months to early March when I made a visit to Pakistan and packed the lathe up ready for shipment, and I'll take you through the whole process of shipment and receiving it here. Here I am once again in Pakistan. I've already made a start on shifting the lathe, so this morning with some friends I was able to dismantle some of it. I got the headstock off, removed the lead screw and the feed shaft, removed the bed, lightened the stand, and then we were able to manhandle all that out. Where you can see I've got lots of other bits and pieces here: the saddle, tailstock, top slide, the motor. I do hope I'm going to be able to fit it into the space I've got available in the box. It went up these stairs, so you can see that was a little bit tricky. Difficult to carry the stand and actually get up the stairs at the same time, but anyway, we managed that. We up-ended it at the top, rotated it out, and we went at right angles at the top there. You can see we've made a start loading items onto the pallet while keeping the center of gravity as low as possible. Immediately over the top of the headstock I'm going to place a shelf for other heavy items and also put as much as possible inside the stand. The only exception to this was the bed, and for dimensional reasons it could only fit on top of the stand. Now you can't just use any materials for a packing box. It has to be from approved materials like this one or fumigated at the port. I had this made to my dimensions to enable me to pack everything into the smallest possible space and yet keep things safe. After a trial assembly, we were ready to start assembling the box. I placed the heavier items on the bottom, and each of the larger components had a designated place. They were chocked so they couldn't slide around and bump into each other, and I was very careful to make sure that everything was stable. And finally we filled in with the smaller, lighter items. Just so happens it's just assembly of all this.
I've got one that'll reach, it'll do a ton. Right. Yeah, so I can get it on the tail lift. Right. It might drop a little bit when it bumps onto it, right, but it won't go anywhere. Right.
This was actually the second time that the courier service tried to deliver the box. The first time it came on a lighter truck with a lighter tail lift, which was just too small for the size of the box and its weight. When it went through customs in Karachi, it was labelled as being 200 kilograms, but I knew that was wrong. It was closer to 850.
What we have to do is, I have to move, hopefully the motor bit will go up.
Fortunately, I'd already made a couple of ramps to enable the pallet truck to get up the curb, and the delivery actually was remarkably straightforward, except for lifting the electric pallet truck over the top of the box. I was very grateful to the driver for the care he took in handling the pallet well, and the extra time he put into manoeuvring things so he could get it off the tail lift. As you can imagine, I was keen to get the lid off the box, and there were two prime concerns I had. One was, had the contents been disturbed, had they shifted in transit, and secondly, had there been any damage from humidity causing rust. So when we assembled the box, we were concerned that it would be structurally strong, that it would stand knocks and bumps on the way. So there were dozens of screws. I proceeded to remove these, and right up to this point it still wasn't apparent to me that the box had in fact been opened. Okay, this isn't the way I put it together. When I put it together, this was supported on the end. So there's a shelf in here, and that was supported on the end. So when I designed the box, I intended it would be closed and opened from the top. I, of course, envisaged that customs might at some point want to open it up, and I had assumed wrongly that they would do that from the top. Of course, by removing the end, they destabilized everything and collapsed, but fortunately no damage was done. Time to remove some of the heavy items stored inside the cabinet. So far there had been no signs of rust or any other damage. Everything seemed to have been relatively stable, nothing had moved around. So as I unpacked things, I placed them around the workshop area, ready for assembly over the next few days. With more space available to me outside of the workshop, this was an opportunity to use the engine hoist to lift the bed off the stand to clean the mating faces with the stand. These are actually quite important because ultimately they control the accuracy of the whole machine. This was also an opportunity to replace the O-rings around the holding down bolts to prevent coolant from dripping down into the stand below. Again, we were very careful to ensure that mating faces were clean as we installed the headstock. Using the engine hoist was much easier than doing this by hand, as the headstock has to be dropped vertically into place to locate the single dowel pin. I keep an old piece of sturdy worktop counter for shifting things around. Now originally I had intended to use 1.5 inch diameter scaffolding pipe, but I found this smaller pipe which was readily available, and in the end actually it proved to be a better option because as the lathe came into its resting place, it was at the approximate height for chocking it up. Despite the smaller diameter pipe, it was relatively easy to maneuver. The ground was uneven and there was quite a large gully going into the front door, but it was no problem at all. And I'm really glad that I chose to partially assemble the lathe outside rather than trying to fiddle around in the limited space of the workshop. That would have been quite tricky. Needless to say, I was thankful for the help of my father and my brother in shifting the lathe into the workshop space. The position it's in is by design. I actually drew a little plan of this and fiddled around with the lathe in different positions, and for me this was the optimum position. So this angle here is deliberate. It maximizes space at the end here, which I need for the pillar drill. So in leveling up the lathe, I've used my engineer's level, and I have put two hardwood blocks at the rear of the lathe at the headstock and one here at the tailstock. And then one of my jacks, which I made in a previous video, is at the headstock to level the headstock end, and there is a jack on the front of the machine down here to level the tailstock end. And if you want to see a previous video on that topic, I'll put a link up here, and that describes how to do that in detail. I was quite concerned about moisture and shipment by sea. In the end, I think this was on a ship for about 3.5 months. Seems to have gone via Singapore, which seems strange to me. So I was quite concerned about that, and when I packaged it all up, I used a lot of WD-40, and I'm glad to say that there are very minimal signs of rust. I'm not even sure, no, it's not a rust. Oh, that's good news. It's just like an accumulation of oil, and I think what happened was that the solvent dissolved the oil that was already on the machine, and it kind of pooled. So there we are. But I can't say there's any rust on this machine at all, despite its 3 months at sea. So that's really good news. Now, one of the problems that I knew I was going to face was the limited space I have available to me. And so I decided that for me, the best way to locate the machine was to locate it against the wall at an angle. And that meant that the access to the motor at the rear would have been hindered. So I actually cut a hole in the wall and put this door in. I'll show you from the outside as well. So I'll be using that door to get access to the rear for mounting the motor. So I don't envisage using that much, but it does mean that I can bring the lathe right up to the wall. So I left just enough space on the end here to get me access to the rear of the bench and also my small pillar drill. Also so that I've got access there for using the hollow mandrel if I need to put longer bar in. And then at the other end, I need to leave enough space to withdraw the lead screw and the feed screw shaft for assembly. So at that angle, I should be able to withdraw those sufficiently to assemble everything. So that's my final position for the lathe. What I'm going to do now is start reassembling. Assembly of the apron requires that the lead screw and the feed shaft be withdrawn, and that necessitates going into the gearbox to remove a circlip, a couple of gears and a roll pin. And then it's possible to reassemble everything and tighten up the apron and add a few other smaller components. It was slightly inconvenient to assemble the taper turning attachment from the front, but it was certainly doable. There are two sets of adjustable gibs for the taper turning attachment, but I'll probably readjust these later. Installation of the cross-slide lead screw requires a bit of manipulation of the taper turning attachment, including rotating the bearing block on top. But having done this before, it was all familiar. The nylock nut on the end of the cross-slide lead screw needs to be tightened to provide a certain amount of preload on the two bearings and also to eliminate backlash. It seems I may have to move the tailstock of the lathe away from the wall to gain a bit of extra space. I don't want to be using auto traverse going in the tailstock direction then crash into the wall, so I'll think about that later. Assembly of the lead screw and feed shaft gearing on the end here is relatively straightforward. This is part of the mechanism which operates the clutch. There's actually one small item missing from this. There's supposed to be a retaining washer on the end of the clutch assembly to operate the brake, and I haven't used the brake so far, so that's something I need to sort out later on. It's time to use the newly made hatch in the wall to access the rear of the stand. I'm going to use this to install the motor mounting plate, the motor itself, and I'll use this to do the wiring too. So I've already greased the bearings in the motor. It's a question of putting these 4 bolts in now. Actually, I think I need to slip the belt in first. Mind you, it should be. Looks close though. I think we'll do that from the other side, that one. Well, it really didn't take long to install the lathe. I've set the inverter up, wired it all in, tested it, and also leveled it, and it's actually ready to use. Now, at the beginning of the video, I said I would comment on the experience of shipping this from Pakistan, and as to whether it was really worth all that time and money. I think purely in financial terms, it probably didn't make sense. I could have sold the lathe over there and saved the cost of shipment, combine that with whatever I got for it there and reinvested that in a new machine here. But in overall terms for me, it didn't actually make sense. First of all, I needed to sell the lathe in very limited time. I was only there visiting, and I would have had to have found a buyer. I would have had to have reassembled the machine. As you saw, I needed to disassemble it to get it out of the basement where it was located. And I had no way of knowing whether I would find a customer, particularly in the place where we lived. So the sale, I think, would have been unsatisfactory. I would have got very much less for it than it's really worth. And could I have done it in available time? That was quite an uncertainty. The packing box I had actually made in advance before I got there, so that had already arrived before I arrived, and I had help there to receive it. Packing didn't take long. I was able to pack it in such a way that it would not be top heavy. These machines are top heavy, and I've seen examples of them having fallen over, and there would have been plenty of opportunity for that to happen en route. So leaving it in the disassembled state made sense. The packing box was designed to be as wide as it is high, with as much of the heavy stuff on the lower level as possible. Of course, I had to pay for the shipment because I imported it more than 1 year after arriving in the UK myself. I had to pay all the importation duty and VAT. So that was a bit of a loss. I also had to insure it. That didn't actually cost much, but it was there for peace of mind. But the real bonus for me was to have a machine here which I already knew and was well equipped and was in good condition. So had I sold this and I had to look for a new one here on the second-hand market, I think it would have taken me a long time, and it would have been difficult to find a machine to this spec which I could have available to me here. Of course, I would have had to have gone and fetched it. That would have meant a lot of extra work. Whereas shipping it, I actually had it delivered to the door. The machine is in good condition. I've already renovated it, and if you want to see the videos on the renovation, then I'm including a link here so you can go back and have a look at those. It comes with a 4-jaw chuck, a 3-jaw chuck, faceplate, catch plate, a taper turning attachment, and lots of tools. So it's quite well equipped, and it's actually already set up to use. Despite the extra cost, I think this was the right decision for me. It may not have been for someone else. So I certainly learned a lot about packing and exporting and importing and how shipments work. It took 4 months from packing up to receiving it here and getting it installed, and during that time it spent 7 weeks at sea. A lot of time was spent waiting for it to be collected in Pakistan and to get it actually onto a shipment into a container in Karachi. So thanks for joining me for this video. I hope it's been interesting. I do hope that you'll join me for another video soon. I'll be starting a new topic. Thank you.